This is Remote Daily, your daily dose of inspiration.
Let's hop right in with AI and the future of work. In March at South by Southwest, you went on stage, you gave the condensed version of your annual trend report. Link for everyone is going to be in the chat in a second. 660 trends, if I remember the number correctly, more than ever. You said doing your job of being a quantitative futurist is getting harder than ever with all the amount of uncertainty and the noise and the speed of change. That was then, half a year ago. Now, Anne and Ottilia from our community actually both sent us exactly the same question. They want to know, it's been 6 months since your annual trend report was published. What are recent developments, Amy, or trends that have surprised you or challenged your previous predictions?
Got it. First of all, thank you for having me on the show. And everybody, thank you for all of the terrific questions. So we have been for the past almost 20 years producing an annual report of tech trends. It grew out of, honestly, me sending our early clients just reminders of what to be paying attention to. So it was blips out of our models that grew into this report over time. There were 666 trends in this year's report, which is actually just a few more than the previous year. So for us, trends are not trendy. That's a really important distinction. We track longitudinal trends that are all rooted in data, and we find them by going through a fairly complicated process. So yeah, that's just I think an important distinction, because people really love trend reports, but trend reports are easy to stick on a shelf and not take any action on. A trend report and the trends themselves are just foundational building blocks and nothing else. They don't actually tell us about the future. So it's the intersection between trends, the convergences, that are what shape the future. So to answer the question, what surprised me, it's been about 6 months. My job is never to be surprised. So I would say there's not a lot that has surprised me. I would say we've seen additional movement in a couple of areas. So obviously one is artificial intelligence. November 2022, so last year, roughly at this time, is when OpenAI released ChatGPT to the general public.
Right.
And honestly, all it really did was galvanize media attention, and then introduce a lot of businesses that have been sort of sitting on their hands and waiting on AI to the concept that AI has been here with us for a long time. So we've seen a lot of increased funding and development in AI, and specifically generative AI. And we're also starting to see companies take more of a platform approach. So instead of it just being about a chatbot, like what's the new ecosystem, AI wearables are kind of the next thing that's coming. So devices that are specifically built for conversational computing. So I would say the big change is just speed and money, almost more than anything else, with AI.
And we have a question for everyone in the room right now through Menti, our visualization platform, because we would actually like to know, when was the last time you used a generative AI tool? Generative AI, things that create content such as ChatGPT, Bard, Microsoft Copilot, Notion, Dolly. You've read all the names, and it is kind of amazing, isn't it, Amy, to see how the adaptation has been working just over these past months. Most people who are responding right now have used generative AI over the last 48 hours. You just said your job is not to be surprised. However,
it doesn't surprise me, because again, there are just more inputs and opportunities and ways to use it. I still think a lot of what's happening is early days experimentation. But the more utility there is that people can immediately find, the more these tools will start to spread, which is the opposite of what's happening with Thread, which is Meta's Twitter competitor. Initially there was this, huge avalanche of new users, and then a pretty steep cliff, and I don't know. I'd be curious to know if you took a similar poll on how many people are using Threads. People are, who signed up versus who actually uses it. But that's because of utility and yeah, I mean, I think it's more utility than anything.
Yeah. Amazing how you described this kind of like wake up moment. Out of a sudden, there was a user interface. Out of a sudden, people put their hands out and companies put their money out. While the responses have been rolling in, I was thinking of a question that Nancy sent to us leading up to today's question. Do you think we're already in the middle of the next AI disruption? And Christina and I, who spoke yesterday, we were thinking about this. And so let me rephrase the question a little bit, because I would actually like to know, what phase of AI disruption are we in right now? Like, from your point of view, where are we?
Well, look, AI is a long horizon technology. I would argue that, it's been in some form of development for hundreds of years. And I don't mean that rhetorically, I mean it like literally. The term was coined in 1956. There was a similar period of extreme hype and enthusiasm. There were huge promises made about what AI could do during the Cold War, especially. And initially, there were some great developments, and then these other amazing promises didn't get fulfilled, and funding dried up. So in the 80s, we entered this AI winter. We're kind of in a similar period right now. And my concern is that investors will at some point demand that AI gets commercialized. And usually when there are calls for, when the people who invested the money come back seeking returns on their investment, that's when stupid decisions get made in businesses. So this is a very, very long horizon technology. We've got decades to go. Yes, I know it feels like there's been a ton of development. There really hasn't. All of that development has been happening. It's just been happening in a way that you couldn't or did not see. So what phase of evolution are we in? We're in a period of lots of attention, lots of investment, and, a moment where we'll see increased business activity. I do not think this is the tipping point where the robots will come and murder us in our sleep, or AI will become our overlords, which is what a lot of people are talking about. I do think there is a tipping point in regulation, and trying to think through how do we regulate this, how to think about data. And I think there are some businesses that are, leaders are making decisions based on fear or FOMO, which is the fear of missing out, without taking the time to build strategy. So the other big thing here for you to take away is any decisions on AI in the very short term must be connected to long-term strategy. You will regret not having built the strategy later on if you make quick decisions today. So that's what
Which is part of the reason why you're about to expand into Europe, and we will talk about that in just a second. Do you actually have a favorite AI tool at the moment, Amy? If that's even a phrase to use, is there one that you find yourself using more than others?
I mean, I've been coding machine learning since before all of these other tools existed. So
you even hacked an online dating app
I did
back in the days.
Back in the day. I would say that I'm using everything because I'm like everybody, I'm sort of experimenting. I would say they all offer different strengths. I would say they are all still very riddled with bias. And I would also say I'm kind of ticked off that every book I've ever written is part of book 3, which is a corpus that was largely relied on for the newest version of ChatGPT.
The most overlapping questions we received from the community up front were about AI and kids and education. And I know you care about this a lot. You talked about it at South by as well. You are a mom yourself. So there were Florian, there was Lars, there was Martin and others who basically all asked one question: how do we prepare our kids for AI? And how does education need to change to get there? Now, you as a mother, as a teacher, a professor, as somebody who has, as you just said, been in this topic for such a long time, what would you say to all of us who have that question?
I would say, again, you started the show with mindfulness. The point of mindfulness is to stop and just be present in the moment and sit with whatever real world data there may be. It's a good thing to practice some of those skills when approaching technology in your kids. Because again, I think that there is this fear, either abject fear or fear of missing out. And we're just not being practical. So in our house, we built our own network. It's provisioned in a way that allows our daughter to access certain things, but not all things. She's one of, I think, 6 kids left in her class who does not have a phone.
How old is she, may I ask?
13.
Okay.
So she's got
She
a
does
watch.
not have a phone, just to clear that. No device for her that she owns personally.
She's got an Apple Watch, mainly because
Okay.
she walks to school. So we like to just know where she's at. But we want her to use and learn what these tools do. So she was actually a very early user of GPT, but before it got, she's using my accounts. One of the things she said early on was, everything that this is spitting out kind of sounds the same. So she noticed that the system, if you're asking it to do things, it's kind of homogenous, and she saw early examples of it hallucinating, of it being wrong.
Mm-hmm.
She's got Bard on her laptop, one of the laptops she uses, and it spits out answers to things. As you know, there's an AI summary now for those of you who have used that tool. During UN General Assembly, I was there to give a speech, and I brought her with me. And on the train ride, I had her look up the UN just so that she had some background, and Bard spit out like an automatic summary. So she starts reading, and I was like, "Who do you think gave you the answers to this? Like, where do you think it's coming from?" And again, just because she lives in our household, she was smart. Like, she knows to look at the URL and like just make sure that it's not UN dot, ha ha ha.
Yes.
Misinformation ahead. And her school also in kindergarten teaches a digital literacy class that's mandatory for everybody. They do it every year.
Wow.
So those kids understand the difference between misinformation and, information. She is in a teeny tiny fractional majority of kids on the planet growing up with digital street smarts. My concern is I'm not worried about her. I'm worried about every other kid that either doesn't learn how to be skeptical of the information that they're seeing, does not have training in elementary school through high school, or even worse, doesn't have unfettered access to digital tools. There's a lot of kids that can't get online. And so, if we are now growing up in a world where AI is an assistive tool, like a calculator is an assistive tool that we all take for granted, we're all going to take AI for granted sometime in the next 10 years. Where does that put kids who didn't have access to a laptop or didn't have access to Wi-Fi? It's, my concern is the digital divide just, the delta just grows in a way that we're not really thinking through today.
And I appreciate that you answer in such a personal way, and also remind us that we as, caretakers have a huge role to play on a daily basis. I would like to shift our conversation a little bit over to Europe. We have a lot of community members joining today from Central European time zone. I want to say the German-speaking lands, and of course, Scandinavia and Austria, Switzerland. We saw people from UK joining. So welcome again to you all. And Christina, I have seen you came back. Are you doing better on the connection? Let's just do a quick tech check together.
Do you hear me?
Yes. Oh my God. Perfect. Your image is still a little bit blurred, and it's still a little choppy, but we'll do our best. Christina, you actually pointed me to this amazing story about a Danish political party led by leader Lars, a chatbot, an AI leading a political movement. I couldn't believe it. So, and Dörte from our community actually took it a step further and sent us the following question, Amy. Do you think AI could lead a company anytime soon?
Well, I mean, if you want to be a little jaded in your response, you could say that AI is leading companies because there are CEOs that feel like they must invest and must have these partnerships. There's a certain journalism organization I'm very disappointed in that rushed to create a partnership with OpenAI and to give it access to their full archive. That news organization, by the way, is the Associated Press in the United States, which is our wire service. I think that they entered into that deal without a long-term strategy. And once you have a system trained on your data, that's it. It's a little bit like buying a brand new car and driving it off the lot. The moment it's off, at least in the United States, the moment that brand new car is off the lot, once you try to bring it back in, you've lost half the value. It's just, so I would say that AI is already leading companies in some ways. Now, will there be a chief AI officer? Again, I think it would behoove us all to try to unhook from the fascinating, tantalizing stories we've been told about AI and to just settle back down into reality. And I can guarantee you, however titillated or terrified you may be of artificial intelligence based on the stories you've heard, the practical realities of AI are so much more scary and so much more promising, but probably more scary at the moment. Those are the stories that I would be paying attention to. So the better question is your boardroom or are the leaders of your organization using an assistive AI tool and making decisions based on that without having full transparency into what the corpus looked like? What were the data that train those systems? I can give you a very quick, super quick example as to why this is important.
Mm-hmm.
So AI systems don't train themselves yet, thank God. There's still something called reinforcement learning with human feedback, which means that a model can get so far, and then you still need a person to go through and do what's called annotating. So a human elbow and a human knee look very similar, and they can sometimes confuse a computer system. So you might have a human look at other context and then determine, yes, this is an elbow, or yes, this is a knee. Or it might be even something simpler like, yes, this is a coffee cup, or no, it's not. The people that are doing this work largely they're gig workers in developing economies, places like Kenya and Pakistan. They're getting low wages. They are working for very, very long hours, clicking yes or no all day long. The challenge is that when you're looking at something very simple, like a pen, right, which I'm holding up right now, it's pretty simple to say, yes, this is a pen, or no, this is not a pen. But if you're looking at something that requires more cultural context, for example, then you really need people who understand that culture. So, I have a cup of coffee that I had this morning that's now cold. So if I have a sentence that says, yay, cold coffee, right? Most of you understand in writing that that's sarcasm. And you can tell by the tone of my voice that is sarcasm. But if you're just a kid sitting in a computer room somewhere on the other side of the world where sarcasm is not a thing, and you encounter a sentence that says, yay, cold coffee, you might think that is an expression of joy and mislabel it. So again, these are the kinds of super in the weeds questions that I think you all should be asking and businesses should be asking, because once you start down that road of asking questions, it will slow you down in making what feels like these business decisions that I must make right now about AI or else.
Wow. Thank you. I am going to try to bring Christina in audio only, kind of podcasting here, to make her voice heard. Christina, let's do a quick sound check again. Can you hear us? Are you here with us? Voice of God.
Can you hear me?
I love this. Yes, you're voice of God right now. We can't see you, but we can hear you perfectly. Because now let's talk Europe, Christina. You moved to Europe. You're based in London and Berlin these days. What is actually your mission in Europe as the head of Europe of the Future Today Institute, Christina?
So first, just a tiny correction. I didn't move. I still spent time in New York. So 6 months in New York at least. 6 to 7 months, and then split my time between Berlin and London. Yeah, and the reason why I'm here is because, well, when we had discussions internally about how to develop the business, we also noticed that we receive a lot of interest coming out of Europe, and being European, I also then think if we want to broaden our footprint over here, we need to be here. We can't just do desk research. We need to connect with the local community, be that in research, be that in business, be that in from the public organizations, just to really understand what's going on and also being able to support in a better way. So that's why we decided it would make sense for me to spend some time here to do just that.
Fantastic. I recommend everyone who is in Europe to connect with you. And Amy, you mentioned at the very beginning that you were just traveling through Germany and you were on a stage with German publisher Handelsblatt, and you dropped a little bomb there by saying Germany is missing a vision. Whenever I bring this phrase up to friends of mine who are German here in New York or elsewhere, they nod. Everybody thinks you were right. Now, together with Christina, you're currently working on supporting, building that vision for Germany. Is there a first glimpse? Is there anything that you have been thinking of connected with that vision that you can share with us, Amy?
We're not prepared to share that publicly yet. We will be in the relative near future. Let me maybe answer that question in a slightly different way. And it is, these are public facing scenarios, so we're not going to sell them. We're sort of, so the answer is, or the question might be, why? What's going on? I think that Germany is mission critical to the global economy, to democracy. And, there's been a struggle, especially with Germany's Mittelstand. So those are the small and medium-sized businesses. Germany went through this period of explosive growth, huge GDP gains, followed by contraction, which is what looks like it might be happening this year. That has obviously an impact on the economy, but it also has an impact on just people and how they're thinking. And if your country doesn't provide you, if your leaders don't provide you with, look, here's where we're trying to get to, here's what we think is plausible, then those feelings of discontent can start to erode some of the social structures, some of the belief that people have that they can succeed and be resilient. So we think it's important and personal. Like Christina's, in Berlin half the year. I have a ton of friends in Germany. Some of our favorite clients, some of our favorite businesses, some of the world's best media is in Germany. We all, I think, have a collective reason to want to see Germany succeed. For what it's worth, I don't think the United States has a clear vision of its future either. But we think Germany might be a little bit more willing to listen. So we'll start with you and then see what happens.
Thank you. In Germany, we call that Vorschusslorbeeren. I ask for all German speakers in the chat who can translate this into English to give it a shot. I love that note, and I want to say that we received a bunch of questions up front from Germany specifically. For example, from Sandra and Geronimo. They both work in Germany in executive roles, and they both were asking, how can we, as in Germany-based corporate leaders, whose success is based on a rich past, you just mentioned that, open our thinking boundaries for the future? And of course, one response for that would be work with the Future Today Institute. Yes, but maybe there's something else that you can recommend, especially, you mentioned Mittelstand, especially for companies that have a huge legacy, that have had such great success.
Yeah.
What can you recommend to them? Is there a first step? Is there a general advice that you can give? I know this opens probably 1,000 buckets, but anything you can give advice to Sandra and Geronimo on?
Sure, I absolutely have some advice, and Christina, who is German, may have some additional thoughts on this. My observation is that, listen, in Germany, you've got engineering, you've got logistics, you've got pharmaceuticals, you've got finance and banking and telecommunications. You have some of the most important industries on the planet. From my point of view, these industries and most of the companies working in them have just stopped taking strategic risks. So what you are doing is innovating. What you are doing is iterating. You are not innovating. And somehow Germany, which a couple decades ago was really invested in invention and taking some of those strategic business risks, just like stopped and became so much more conservative. And the leaders of organizations, I don't know, like just really stopped focusing on what was next and only were willing to focus on what's right now. So the sort of easiest and hardest thing to do is to look at the operations of the organization and be very honest with yourselves. Are we innovating or are we iterating? And if the answer is we're iterating, then the question I would put to you is, what's it going to take to move the needle on innovation? And for some more organizations that might mean moving some things around. Sometimes the R&D departments or the innovation departments are just structurally in the wrong place in the organization, or their German organizations are also super siloed. So there's not a lot of sharing that happens across them. That's what I would say. It's the hardest, it's the easiest decision to make and the hardest thing to implement. But without making a commitment, then honestly, we can't help you. And this is one of the things we will, we are a management consulting firm that competes against the world's largest professional services firms, but we only do one thing. That's it. We only do strategic foresight. We only do it using data-driven models. We have a very rigorous system and we're really good at it. If we have a potential client approach us that says, we want you to shake us up, give us a vision of the future, which we hear a lot. Our next question is, what happens when we leave? Like who's in charge of implementing? Yes. And if the answer is no, we'll figure it out, like shake us up, then we will say, no, we can't work with you. I know, Christina, you want to add some to that?
Christina, yes, I was just thinking of Christina, our voice of God. Christina, is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, so actually basing this, referencing what you said earlier, Amy, and also just based on conversations that I've had over the summer, I think especially right now, there's this FOMO of like, okay, there's AI and somehow, it's like, oh, we need to implement AI. It's like a hammer looking for a nail. So I think as a first step, it's first of all, look at what are actual issues or, problems or whatever in the company. And then independently, if, from AI is like, what are the solutions to that? So not technology first, or, first looking what are actual needs, but then as quickly as possible or immediately also always think long-term. So how can you monitor innovation or developments in your company on an ongoing basis so you can move from being reactive to being proactive? So often, oh my gosh, I'm behind with AI. Maybe no, maybe you're not, but just to prepare you for the future and really make sure that you can be proactive and you can be formative and you don't have to just, you're not missing the boat. Think about how to implement those structures internally. And that doesn't need to be like a huge department. That might just be one person or outside or whatever, however that may look like. But I always think, long term, how can I set up my company to be in a good position from now moving forward, in addition, of course.
Thank you, Christina. And I think it's great that you're pointing that out, that it sometimes starts small and you have to think long term. However, Björn just put in the chat, isn't a real problem for Germany that we don't have a strategy, but that we think we don't need a strategy, which brings us into an entirely different conversation. Because the answer to that could be, we're still doing fairly well. So maybe we have to do a little verse before long-term strategy becomes more topic of focus. We have 15 minutes left today on Remote Daily with Amy Webb. Amy, I really appreciate you taking the hour here with us. We have 2 more topics that we want to talk about: futurism and the next. You can chime in with questions. We already received a few on Menti. The link is going to be in the chat for you in just a second. And all the questions, by the way, that are not being answered today, we will look at these after the session again, and we will try to reach out to some of you and get those questions answered. So Amy, let's talk about your job, because preparing for today's session, the word futurist, I kind of like started dreaming of this word, thinking of this word. It is such a weird word to me. You start so many interviews by saying, I don't predict the future, but I'm a futurist. You build scenarios. I get that. However, there is a growing number of people calling themselves futurists with various definitions, various backgrounds. The profession is not protected, just like mine, journalism. And what do you think about that? What is your take on this growing group of people that claim your job description?
That's a great question. So this is my second career. I started out as a journalist. I was a foreign correspondent. I worked for the Wall Street Journal and for Newsweek many years ago. And when I started out as a journalist, the commercial internet was becoming a thing. And so, Felix, you may remember there was this moment in time when there were a bunch of citizen journalists, they were calling themselves, and people who were bloggers. And there was this sort of fissure within the journalism community, trained journalists, which again, like you don't have to get a license to be a journalist, right? So it was this argument about like, what is journalism and what is, who can we trust? So there's a similar thing happening in foresight. You know, strategic foresight, futures, whatever you want to call it, it really is called different things depending on where you are. It's an academic discipline that's been around for a century. And I was curious to know throughout history, was there a positive correlation between big moments of deep uncertainty, like political uncertainty or like big tech announcements, and the number of people calling themselves futurists? And of course, the answer is yes. So it's totally not a surprise to me at all that right now we're seeing this bump up again. It's really, I pulled data from the New York Times archives, so that's my source, but I think it's pretty good. So I've got a quant model that shows like it totally tracks over time. So there's a ton of people now calling themselves futurists. And, you know, again, there is a significant difference between somebody interested in technology and pontificating on what they think is next, and the work that Christina and myself and my colleagues do, which is super boring for the most part and tedious, and involves us sitting in comfy clothing in an office somewhere, pulling more data than you would ever want to look at and building a model with those data, and then getting with our colleagues. We have 37 different frameworks at my last count, and doing the alternating work of qualitative assessment and analysis and quantitative work, and all of that eventually, and then also trying to manage our client expectations, and then eventually getting to the point where we have a scenario. And that process usually takes us a couple of months. Like if we're doing, because the result of our work is like a company places $1 billion bet for real, right? Or a huge tech company changes the plans that it has for its like core technology or whatever it might be. So Felix, you're correct. I often say that we don't make predictions, but that's also a little bit of a lie, because we do some predictive work. The key difference is I refuse to tell you, because I don't know, like, what does AI look like in 20 years? I have no idea. I think the reports that we've all seen about AI is going to give how many trillions of dollars to this part of the economy, 400 trillion people will be out of work. It's bullshit. Sorry, it's nonsense.
And nothing to be sorry about.
Well, I get really mad because you have to have data. When I was a journalist, I did something called computer assisted reporting. So this was early days of data journalism, but I went to Columbia University, the journalism school up the street. It was rigorous. And whenever I published a story, I had to be prepared for an editor to go line by line through anything that I had written interrogate me, and me being able to produce the place where I got the information, and the place where that I got that information had to be primary source information. Like, so this is all to say, I appreciate that everybody has suddenly taken an interest in my job. My sincere hope is that someday in the very near future, the job futurist is about as sexy sounding as accountant. With apologies to any of you who are accountants, you also may be sexy people. But from my point of view, just like every executive is expected to understand how to read a P&L, like every executive should also have some of the basic fundamentals of foresight, which again, from my point of view, is strategy. There should not be a delineation between what is strategy and what is foresight. My point of view is that foresight is the evolution from strategy. And one last thing I'll say, my background is game theory and economics. So foresight, predicting things exists in different forms, whether that's macro, hardcore economics or math or science or whatever it might be. Again, just, this is a moment in time where there's going to be a lot of snake oil salesmen selling you either thought leadership, which there's a lot of right now, or wild speculative ideas about the future, or reports, right? You just really need to be careful right now about who you're listening to, especially if you're a business person.
So if you find someone who's very loud on LinkedIn, calls themselves a futurist, doesn't crunch a lot of numbers, be skeptical. I think that's good advice. Is there a futurist that you follow, however? Is there maybe even someone you find inspiring that you would even recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to toot my own horn here, but I've spent a lot of time finding people who are exceptionally good at doing this work. Christina, I mean, I wish you could see, I'm not just saying this because she's here. She's freaking brilliant. You should see some of you can't, but you should see some of the scenarios that, like, I'm thinking of one in particular, Christina, that I think you went underground and we didn't see you for 2 months. Like,
Christina is blushing right now, but we can't see it. Christina studied law, worked as a journalist, and
and why?
Huge influence on your books on climate and entertainment. So 2 very different topics, 2 very hard things to crunch. Christina, is there actually something you would like to add to that while your boss was giving you a very nice compliment here? Because you're in Europe right now, and Amy pointed it out, futurism, or this profession, has had even more tradition in Europe than in the US. Is there a difference that you're observing right now in your profession between the 2 continents that you inhabited for the last couple of years?
I have to kind of recollect after the shower of gold I've just received. So Amy and I were just talking about that as well before the call. I mean, while I think that foresight itself is the same globally, I think that in Europe, we just have a more holistic way of approaching things, for better and for worse. But like, for just a very simple example, we started much earlier with recycling than we ever did in the US. Obviously a very, very simple example. But so I think while foresight is also still emerging over here, it's a little bit more fruitful ground, so to speak, and openness toward really integrating that into business operations. So that, I would say, is like a big difference to the US.
Wow, fascinating. We're almost at the hour, Amy, so I'll just leave you with one last question here from Christine, who wanted to know, what is the next big thing after AI, or will AI be the big thing for years to come? So what's a next that you can share with us, Amy?
So the next is synthetic biology. So this is, if you were to ask me what's the most important technology platform going forward, I would actually say it's biology. So, biology can be reduced down to ACTG, which are the letters that make up DNA, much like you can reduce computing down to ones and zeros, and I guess quantum computing down to ones and zeros and zeros and ones. So if we have access to the code of life, which we now do because we can use various different tools within the umbrella of biotech and synthetic biology to edit genetic code, write from scratch genetic code, then that unlocks new opportunities for us to address things like climate change, human longevity, overall health. It also means in the future, there's probably an organic nail polish that will never chip. I mean, just all kinds of different things. There is a space where AI and biology overlap. Interestingly, a lot of the same people funding AI and some of the same companies doing the fundamental basic research in AI are also the same folks in the space of biology. So I think that 5 years from now, we'll look back and it, maybe a little bit longer, but there will be a similar sort of fever pitch. My concern once we get there is that biology is much more controversial than basic technology, because it does call into question philosophical and moral questions about life and where it comes from and things like that. I hope we have conversations leading up to that so that it's less of a shock to people. But I would say that's what's next. Now, I will also offer one last caveat, and it's this. We have very short attention spans. So don't forget, as much as it may feel like everything is AI right now, 5 years ago, everything was blockchain. And then everything was crypto. And then we cycled back to blockchain again. Then Web3. Then it was meta. Everything was going to be the metaverse. All right. And now here we are with AI. Business has become capricious and fickle. So if you are a leader, I guess we can sort of end where we started, which had to do with focus. It is really hard right now, but if you don't dedicate yourself to maintaining focus, and if you do not have data-driven scenarios, which help you create a vision for a plausible future, it's going to be very hard for you to manage. And there's a high probability that you're going to get dragged into somebody else's idea of what the future ought to look like. So the good news is we have autonomy. The future doesn't just show up, but you have to insert yourself and take actions based on real world practical information.
And you are a great help to that. I'm so glad you are around, Amy. You're here to help us, just like Christina. You're building something in Europe now that I think will help a lot of people and organizations. Amy, one last recommendation before you take off. Is there a book we should read? Is there a newsletter we should subscribe to?
Oh my God, there are so many. Where do I even begin?
What do you read at the moment?
My reading, I'm usually on the MIT Tech Report every day. I read New Scientist every day. Yeah.
MIT Tech Report, New Scientist. We'll sign up to that today. What is your final message to our community, Amy? Is there anything else you would like to share with us before we part ways today?
Yeah. My friends, go spread the gospel of pragmatism. All right. Please, this is a moment where we really have to just stay grounded. Don't float away. Hopefully you will repeat to others what you heard, and hopefully what you heard resonated. I think the best possible future is for us on the horizon, but we've got to be able to see clearly where we're headed. Okay.
And Rahim just gave us the translation for Vorschusslorbeeren. Imagine it's like giving someone a shiny gold medal for a marathon before they have even laced up their running shoes. So I hope you all learned some German today. This was Remote Daily. Bye-bye. Auf Wiedersehen.